So accessibility is a human right. And we as developers, we play a crucial role in shaping the user experience. We can either create bridges or barriers. So let's do the right thing. And by thinking about accessibility, we contribute to a future where no one is left behind, regardless of how your life changes. So hey, my name is Feli, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk about my two favorite topics, accessibility and design systems. So I'm an iOS engineer working at Spotify. I'm from Nuremberg, Germany. I love sketchnoting. Maybe you've seen one of my sketchnotes before from other conferences. I love all kinds of different sports, and a very controversial fact, but it's more fun like that. I really like pineapple on pizza. Okay, lots of fans here. That's good. Okay, today my talk is about how to ensure accessibility in design systems. But what even is a design system? So, do you know the difference between system design and design system? So, just to recap, system design is the process of architecting and structuring software to meet specific functional and technical requirements like scalability, security, performance. While design system is a collection of reusable UI components, style guides, design principles, and all that to ensure consistency across a product's user interface. So this one might actually sound familiar to you if you're working on Apple platforms, because Apple actually provides a lot of tools for us from a design system perspective. So they have colors, they have assistive symbols, they have text components, user controls, styles for buttons, and even whole list and cell styles. And they also have guidelines in place known as the human interface guidelines. But the best thing about Apple's design system is actually that the system UI components are accessible by default. And this is a big win, because you don't actually have to know a lot about accessibility, and you already do a good job. So why can we not just use what Apple provides and continue, and the talk is done? So sometimes the standard components from Apple, they're not enough. They don't suit our needs. So you might want something that's more unique. You want to create a brand, something that doesn't look like every other app. So design systems come to the rescue, because you can actually limit some of the customization options. And for example, you don't want to allow any color and any font, but only those specific to your company. So at Spotify, we have a family of design systems, and we call it Encore. It actually consists of multiple smaller, more focused systems owned by different teams. But Encore offers building blocks like shared code, documentation, design, and guidelines. So hundreds of designers and even more developers work at Spotify. So you might have heard of the main consumer app, and it should run on all these devices, let it be iPhones, watches, TVs, cars, and even fridges. But we also have an app for artists, and we have an app for podcasters, and a few other products. And all of these products, they all should feel and look like something from Spotify. So when you think about accessibility and design systems, when a design system already has support for accessibility out of the box, it actually helps all the feature developers that use the design system to do the right thing. And at Spotify, Encore has opinions about accessibility. So let's look into that. So the first example is color contrast. So we need to ensure enough color contrast so text is easy to read. So at Encore, we have different color themes with semantic colors, and if a developer chooses colors from one theme, they can be actually sure that the color contrast is sufficient. The next one is called multimodality. So don't exclusively rely on color to convey meaning. So here I have an example of an activated and an inactive shuffle button. And how would you know if the shuffle button is active or not? So always consider changing both the shape and the color so that the state is also identifiable for users who can't differentiate the colors. So in Encore, the active state for the shuffle button has a little dot underneath as an extra sign. Okay, if you think about it, UI is actually just one option to let the user interact with your product. So you have some form of information. This should be transported to the user. In case of the shuffle button, the extra dot underneath, it has the context whether shuffle mode is on or off. It actually doesn't matter if it's a visual representation or a specific sound or whatever. It only matters that this information is somehow delivered to the user. And in most apps, the user can in some form interact with the information. So in our case of the shuffle button, a user can enable shuffle mode or disable it. But that action always has to be with your finger touching your screen? We are actually so used to visual information that we sometimes forget that we have other sensors too. But don't lick your phone, no. But if you think of the goal ball example from the Paralympics, so people with good vision, they use the vision to follow the game. But blind people and people with low vision, they can't do that. So that's where the vision pad came into place. With the additional audio descriptions, they can focus on other senses, like touch and hearing. And if we think about our phones, it's similar. So people with good vision, we use that to interact with the app and to read information. But people with low vision, they can't do that. So that's why on Apple platforms, we have a tool for that. It's a screen reader called VoiceOver. And a screen reader reads out the information for the user. There are different ways to navigate. So the first one is you can move your finger around on your screen, and wherever your finger is, the information is going to be read out. Or you can navigate based on swipe gestures. So swipe to the right is navigating forward to the next element. Swipe to the left is navigating backwards. And a double tap with one finger is interacting with the focused item. I'm going to have a live demo at the end where I'm going to show you how this works. So in case of the shuffle button, VoiceOver is going to read out shuffle tracks off button when shuffle is off. And when a user activates it, VoiceOver is going to announce shuffle tracks on. So here on the screenshot, you can see the little rectangle. That's the indicator of VoiceOver. So I have prepared two different versions of the Spotify's Your Episode page now. So this might be the experience without optimizing for VoiceOver. So I just want to highlight this is a faked behavior. This is not how we ship the app right now. But here on this screenshot, you can see you can analyze your app with, for example, Xcode's accessibility inspector. But for this screenshot, I used the Reveal app, which is a tool to inspect view hierarchies, but it also has an accessibility workspace. So in this screenshot, you can see a lot of rectangles, and each rectangle is a focus element for VoiceOver. So you might say, like, okay, that's kind of good enough because all elements actually have a rectangle around it, so all the information can be accessed with the screen reader. But if you imagine how to navigate with a screen reader, imagine swiping through this list with a swipe to the right, and it's going through all these elements. So there are two issues here. So the first one, yeah, you need a lot of swipe gestures, so it is kind of inefficient to navigate. Imagine you want to navigate to the 10th episode in your list, it's going to take you a lot of time. The next issue, though, is you're missing context. So when you have all the content on the same priority, on the same level, when navigating back and forth, which episode would you download when you reach the download button? Like, it's missing the context. So a better behavior would be if you would group the content that semantically belongs together. and you have less focus items. So in this case, each episode would be one focus item. Okay, so you might ask, how do I access the download button now? I can't navigate to it. So there's a thing that Apple provides called UI Accessibility Custom Actions. And when you enable that, VoiceOver is going to announce actions available. And there's a specific gesture you can access the download button in this case. So what's the reason we need to think about this for screen readers? We don't have the same issues when we just look at the design. And the reason is that the design is using some best practices. So the first one is called law of common region. So when elements have a border or a specific background color, they seem to be a group of things that belong together. The next one is law of proximity, where elements that are close together, they appear as a group. So when you apply these practices, the visual content does not look flat and on one level, but it appears like all this content is a group. So let's look at one example of a component in Encore. It's called list row component. So this component uses a slot-based structure. So you can configure different slots. We have, for example, the leading slot, which can have an icon. We have a media slot, which can have a local or a remote image. We have a pre-title, which is usually a text. We have the title, which can be a text. We have the subtitle, it can be a text with badges and additional information. We have the trailing slot, the body, and the footer slot. So only the title slot here is mandatory, all of the other ones are optional. And you might think, it's just a layout component, right? So should we even think about accessibility? So we just learned, especially in long lists, it would be nice if the content is actually grouped together for a nicer experience. So how can we apply what we learned about accessibility to this generic component? Do we want that feature developers have to think about accessibility, or should it just work? How do we get the best user experience in the end for our users? So let's start by looking at the developer experience. So on a scale of no developer input is needed to a lot of input is needed, if accessibility would just work out of the box, no input from the developer is needed. The other extreme, when nothing works out of the box, we have a lot of effort and knowledge that is needed from the developer. There's also a middle layer where we support the developer a bit with an API to ask for the specific information that we need. Plus, we might have a good documentation that explains how things should work. So on the other side, the user experience, we have a range of nothing is working, we have just a minimal accessibility support with like lots of annoyances, then we have great support and of course the best experience ever. So I was thinking, how do we actually bring these two together? We actually have to find a trade-off of how much input we need from the developer and how much accessibility experience we have. We also don't want to overwhelm the developer, but like still get the best experience ever. And to be honest, yeah, I was a bit lost how to solve that. So here is an image from Liz Foslian with two scenarios. The first one shows a discouraged person, aka me, with a massive wall and text that says, "Don't set the bar too high on your first try." The second scenario shows a person climbing the stairs and the text, "Aim a little higher as you climb." So I got some help, and together with the Encore team, we came up with some guidelines to help approach that problem. So the first guideline is called Progress over Perfection, and I think this is especially for me a classic. I want to have it perfect right away, but to be honest, it doesn't have to be. It's better to just start and then update over time. The second guideline is there's no such thing as perfect accessibility. So we can conform to guidelines, follow best practices, but you actually need the feedback from your real users to know if things work like you thought they would. So every user has different needs, so it's about finding compromises here and there. And also, I try to think of accessibility as a journey, so it's not a task that you complete one day and then never come back to. The third guideline is to provide different levels of abstraction. So don't create one API that solves every use case, but multiple ones. But what do I mean with that? So 80% of the use cases for a design system component might be simple. The developer uses this component exactly how you imagined. They use this API all the time and it should be very obvious how to use it. The remaining 20% of the use cases, developers need something different. They might need an additional icon in front of the pre-title slot. They might want to use some custom control in the trailing slot. They need more flexibility and a more detailed API. They might use it only from time to time, but it should still be easy to use for them. Only a tiny part of the use cases, they need something even more detailed, like a low-level API, with full control to create whatever they need, and they only use it sometimes, maybe even rarely, but it should still be possible for them. So the fun thing now is that each of these layers is built on top of each other. So if one layer doesn't meet your requirements, you can just drop down to the next one where you have more control of what you want to build, but also need to take over more responsibility. Let's see if we can come up with a game plan. So ideally, we have something like an out-of-the-box solution that's just work. How would that look like? Let's look at some code. So at the bottom right, you can see a preview of the component, and below that, you can see what VoiceOver is going to read out for that component. But let's start by instantiating the list row component and then configuring the content. The media slot, we just add an image. For VoiceOver, the image in lists is mostly decorative, so VoiceOver is not going to read out anything for that. Then we have a pre-title with the text "Most shared podcast in Sweden." We add this to VoiceOver as well. The next title is a text with "Damn fine coffee." We also want to have that in VoiceOver. Sorry. Okay, and then we have a trailing slot where we add a button. And I'm sorry. So internally we know this is a button, so we add it as a custom action. So VoiceOver is going to announce actions available. So you can actually write all that code without having a clue about accessibility. How does this work internally? So we have a setup function with the on-core content, so all the slot information as a function parameter. Then we say is accessibility element equals true, to group all the elements together by making it one accessibility element. This enables the more efficient navigation, and the context is also clear. So the next one is the accessibility label. So we ask the content for the computed label for it. And this is how we do it. So we just iterate over each slot, ask for the accessibility label for each slot, and then we concatenate the information together with a comma if they're not empty. So the next one is the accessibility custom actions. So if there are any buttons inside the content, we just map them to a custom action. The API is called UI accessibility custom action. So the next one is accessibility custom content. So we do the same thing. We ask the content for the accessibility custom content. The API is called AX custom content. You don't have to remember all of that right now. We'll have a look at that at the demo in the end. And the last one is accessibility user input labels. This is useful for voice control. It is just an array of strings. Okay, cool. So what about SwiftUI? We all love SwiftUI, right? So SwiftUI actually has more support for accessibility. So there's this magic function called accessibility elements children, and you can say combine, which does all of that for you. It groups the children to one accessibility element, and that's all we need. But yeah, actually sometimes the out-of-the-box approach is not enough. So let's go back to our game plan. So if the out-of-the-box solution is not good enough, we might add an API, which is very explicit, where we ask for the information we need. So it should still be easy for the developer to use, but it's a bit more work. So we have another Encore component that has a less abstract concept. It's called the box. So it's the most generic layout component in Encore. It actually only has a specific corner radius, can configure a container style, but this is what the list row component uses under the hood. So this one is so generic, we have no information what the content represents semantically. So that's why we add an API where we ask for the accessibility information that we need. So same as previous, you have a preview of the component with what VoiceOver is going to read out. So let's instantiate the box component. Let's add a content view. It can be anything really, just a custom view. So now we need to ask the developer for all the information for accessibility, so there's no way they can forget about it. So first, the accessibility label, so all the text inside the component should be added here. Then we have the accessibility value, which is for all the state information. So right now, the playlist is currently playing, so that's what we add. The next one is the accessibility hint, which is optional for what happens when the user is interacting with the component. Then we have the accessibility traits. So this describes the component, what it semantically represents. If you can interact with it, it's a button. And then we have the custom action. So for any other button that's inside the component, for example, in this case, the play pause button, it should be added here. So in the end, VoiceOver would announce soft pop hits playlist by Spotify, currently playing button, actions available. So to support the developer a bit more, there's a lot of code documentation when using the box component, and there are a few examples. So if you haven't heard of the properties before, you still get an idea what you need to pass in. Okay, back to our game plan. So if all the previous components are still not flexible enough, developers can still build custom components with other building blocks and tokens, like labels or buttons from Encore. But in step 3, we actually have some additional guidelines in place. So this is one example for how a component should behave when large font sizes is enabled, so dynamic type. So ideally, we switch from a horizontal layout to a vertical one. It's called a narrow layout in Encore. And this behavior, for example, is also integrated in list row by default. Okay, so enough theory. Let's do the fun part for you and the scary part for me. A live demo. So I need to switch to my phone. Okay. So for the first one, you can actually take out your phones and follow along, because we are going to set up accessibility shortcuts. So if you go to your settings app, scroll a bit down, there's a section called accessibility. And now scroll all the way down. And the second last entry is called accessibility shortcut. And here you can see the list with all the assistive technology that's provided. And you can enable whatever you want, but I would recommend to have voice control, VoiceOver, and if you're brave enough, search control. Okay. So let's take a look at the Encore Showcase app. So this is just an internal app that we use to test our components. And when you have set up the accessibility shortcut, you can triple tap the home button. And now you see the list of shortcuts and can quickly enable and disable some technology. So let's start with VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on. Encore. List row component. Back button.
Okay, does this sound fine for you? So, like I said, there are different ways to navigate now. You can either move your finger around.
Hide. Most shared. Hide. List row component. Back button.
Or you can navigate with swipe gestures.
Hide guide. Button. Gear-shape fill. Button. Most shared podcast in Sweden. Damn fine coffee. Actions available.
So now we have navigated to the list row component, and it actually announced the actions available at the end. So we know there are some actions here. So now you can use your two fingers, and like you would open a bottle, rotate them.
More content. Actions. Activate.
And there's a little menu now appearing. It's called the VoiceOver rotor. And when we select actions, we can now swipe up or down to scroll through all the custom actions.
More options. Listen.
So these are the two buttons. The three dots is announced with more options, and the listen button is announced with listen. And now we can double tap with one finger.
Alert. List row. Hello. Button. Perfect grinning face with starry eyes. Button.
And we have tapped on the button.
Most shared podcast in Sweden. Damn fine coffee. Swipe up or down to select a custom action, then double tap to activate.
So you might have noticed that we see a text here in the body slot, which is visually visible, but was not announced by VoiceOver. And that was actually one intentional decision, because most of the time it's just a long text which provides additional information, for example, about episodes. But if you have it in a list, it can be really noisy, because this is a user-generated text.
Screen dimmed.
So it can be anything really what's inside. So we hit this information with the custom content.
More content.
Which is another rotor option, more content. And now you can swipe up again.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Star slurp star. You know. This is. Excuse me. A damn fine cup of coffee.
So there's still a way for the user to interact and to get all the information, but it's another step.
Alert. Selected. VoiceOver. Button. VoiceOver off.
So for anyone who has enabled VoiceOver and forgets how to navigate, you can actually also use Siri to disable VoiceOver. So that's good to know. Okay, so the next one I want to show you is voice control. So this is actually really useful to know, because it's one of the assistive technology where you can still use your phone like you're used to. Like, there's no way you can be caught in voice control. But you see there's a few numbers now appear on the screen. And now you can use your voice with voice commands and interact with these. So you can say, show actions for 4. And we get a little drop down with the custom actions, and you can say tap 1. Tap 1. And we see the pop-up, and we just interacted with the button without even touching the phone. Tap 1. So by default, voice control is activated with a number mode, but there are actually different modes. So there's also a name mode, show names. So instead of the numbers, you can actually see names. Since iOS 18, it only uses the first word of your user input labels. So previously it would have announced damn fine coffee. With iOS 18 it's just damn. I think it's one of the decisions to make it more efficient for the user so they have less to say and it's also less error prone. But let's see if Apple adds some customization options for the user to actually decide if they want to have the shorter one or the longer one. And there's also another mode, show grid. So you can have a grid as an overlay. So in case the developer messed up and the button is not a custom action, there's no way to interact with it. A user can use the grid mode and then interact with the grid. Tap 12. So now I just tapped on a specific part of the grid and the device knows I tapped on the More Options button. Okay, now I'm really brave and I'm gonna enable switch control. So before you ever enable switch control, make sure you go to settings first and scroll to switch control, because you actually have to set up some switches. So a switch could be an external device, for example, one physical button that a user presses. But a switch could also be a specific face gesture or a sound, or like I have it here, a touch on the full screen, so anywhere on the screen. So the simplest mode for a switch control would be to set up the full screen, select item, and then go to the scanning style and set it to auto. So when you have done that, so now you might hear a little ticking sound and you see a dark blue rectangle that's auto-scanning the page for you. And since we have set up one switch, which is a touch on the anywhere in the screen, we just have to wait for the rectangle to land on our item and tap on the screen. And now you see a different menu popping up, which actually has all the custom actions included. So it's also really nice if you have custom actions, because it makes it easy for switch control users as well to interact with it. Okay. So one thing about switch control is sometimes it works to disable it with Siri. Most of the times it does not work. So this is definitely something where it can get stuck. So yeah, make sure to actually check which switches you have set up. So for the next mode, we add 2 more switches, which is one to move to the next item and one to move to the previous item. And I have set up 2 sounds. So the clock one is just a, and the previous item one, the sh, is just a sh. So then you can set the scanning style to manual. because now you have controls to move forwards and backwards. So now you see the rectangle is on the screen again, but it's not moving forwards. That's because we have set up the scanning style to manual. So now I can That's the joy of live demos, isn't it? Shh. So the sh works, okay. Shh. 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 Damn it. Okay, you see, that's always fun. Okay, let's try to get out of here. Whew. So one trick is also to to move switch control to the to the item at the top, because if you're like me and you mess up the sound, it's the first item that's gonna be selected, and then you can just like activate it. Okay. So that was my live demo, and I switch back to my slides now for a little summary. Okay, so I shamelessly stole the idea for my summary from my friend Danny DeVesa, and I actually made a sketch note of my own talk. So as a recap, we talked about the Olympics and the Paralympics and how the Vision Pro makes the sport more inclusive. By the way, this is a good time to take your picture. So we talked about, we have 5 senses, so we should not only focus on vision. We talked about the law of proximity and the law of common region and how they group content visually together. Then we looked at the differences between system design and design systems and had a quick intro to Encore at Spotify with the shuffle button, but also the list row and the box component. Apple's system UI components are accessible by default. And then we investigated how do we bring the developer and the user experience together, and how to achieve the best results for VoiceOver, not only VoiceOver, but for accessibility in general. And last but not least, our guidelines: progress over perfection. There's no perfect accessibility, and provide different levels of abstraction. And maybe as a takeaway point, try out VoiceOver. You can disable it with Siri and learn how it works and try to navigate around with your own apps. So thanks again for having me, and have a great rest of the conference, and reach out to me if you get stuck with switch control. I can help you.
So good. I don't know if you noticed, but she was accessible as she presented. She had that one slide with the 2 pictures. She described the pictures, read the caption. It's just when you do something like this, do it all the way. It was very impressive. Questions? Real quick.
I'll make you not walk too far. Okay, I'm curious if you have advice. I previously was at a really big company where I had the opportunity to do a lot of accessibility in UI kit. So it was a lot of hands-on voiceover, which I really loved. And I'm now at a tech startup for a Mac app, and it's not their priority, but it's something I care about. And of course, I'm a junior, so influence is minimal. So I'm curious what kind of advice you'd have for, like, at least the first step of trying to squeeze in some priorities and work with my designer on that.
Yeah. I think this is a common issue at companies. Like, management has different ideas what's a priority. So my idea would be, like, just talk about accessibility more often. Just try to, like, have it on people's minds, and just ask a lot of questions. How should this design look like when you use a larger font size? How would this be for a user who uses screen reader? And if you get the answer, like, I don't care, that's not a priority, we don't have users who use assistive technology, then yeah, you can ask like, why is it okay to discriminate disabled people? Like you wouldn't do that for other minorities, would you? So yeah, just try to do the right thing and keep on fighting if it's okay for your mental health at one point. Just take care of yourself. I know it can be quite frustrating if people don't care about things you're passionate about. So always keep your mental health a priority as well.
Thank you.
There's one on the right side.
Many thanks for your talk. I had a question, since you have Encore at Spotify, and obviously it's on over a lot of platforms. So what does, for example, how much do you take care of parity, for example, with Android, our closest sibling, so to say? And for the accessibility custom content, I didn't know about that. That was fun. But does Android, for example, have the same?
Oh, that's a good question. So for the custom content, I'm actually not sure if there's a Android option for that as well. But in general, like when it comes to accessibility, most platforms have similar concepts. So when it comes to a screen reader on Android versus iOS, it actually works really similar and they have similar APIs. So from design system perspective, we try to focus on the experience and then let the platform developers figure out how to like actually do that in the end, if that makes sense. And yeah, sometimes you run into limitations. Something works on one platform, whereas something doesn't work on another one. And then, you try to, find a good compromise and make it work. Or, deal with the differences and live with them.
Okay, thanks. One more?
Thank you, Philly. Again, please.